Hello, Internet! Gino, that Pinguino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and today is a very special episode because we're talking about Magic the Gathering again. It's not necessarily popular demand that has brought it back so much as my own personal preference for talking about it, so popular demand of one, just me. But we're going to be talking about some Rivals of Ixalan. It's coming out soon, and so I brought on a guest yet again to discuss it. Alex, who is a friend of mine. We've been playing Magic together for a while now. High-level Magic player, I'd say, at this point, right? Fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think once you get invited to Nationals, you're officially high-level.
Yeah.
Or you go to all the GPs.
Yeah.
In which case, you basically, it's fair enough. You clearly, if you go to all the GPs, you at least think of yourself as a high-level player. Right. And so, before we start talking about some Magic stuff, reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at That Pinguino or at Deep Listens Pod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. You can hit up our comment sections or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. So, Alex, why don't you introduce yourself, like how you got into Magic, what decks do you like to play, that sort of stuff.
Well, hi. As Gino said, my name's Alex. And we've been playing Magic together for a while. I've been playing for about 6 years, and I've really gotten into it recently, starting to travel, and I really enjoy it.
So what was your first set that you played?
Well, first set, technically, I think was like M10. I found an Arbor Elf under the bunk at my cabin. But then I started playing competitively and traveling in about, I don't know, maybe Kaladesh block. So quite recently.
Yeah, and the first set you learned how to play was it M10, or did you just have an Arbor Elf and it's like this Magic thing? It's clearly Destiny. It was under a bunk. I should get into it.
Yeah, the latter.
Okay, nice. So you've been playing for long enough to see some of the ebbs and flows and stuff like that. What's your favorite format so far that you've played?
Well, I mean, it changes a lot. Like, sometimes if a draft format is really good, that'll be my favorite format. And then I like Modern when it's balanced. But sometimes there's something that's just too oppressive. So right now I think it's Modern. The format's very healthy, lots of different decks, and the gameplay is interesting. It hasn't been standard in quite a while because it gets solved very quickly, and you start to recognize the play patterns, and it starts to become muscle memory, which is not very fun.
Yeah, especially you tend to glom onto some of the very good decks very quickly, and so it's extra. If you're brewing your own decks, at a certain point you're starting to find whether these decks are good and finding your own rhythms, but for most of the high-level standard decks, they are so heavily covered that even if you weren't just playing the matches over and over and over again, when you're watching coverage or studying any sort of website, all they talk about is the exact same deck.
Right. I'm not exactly the creative type. I let the Pro Tour players figure out what the good cards are, and I listen to them say it on podcasts, articles, videos, and then I sort of latch onto that and ride it out until the next standard set comes out.
Yep, and then you count on me to come with some sort of weird garbage.
Right.
That will be the determinant. Can I deal with weird garbage? Gino want to play a game, and then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to be playing Peace of Mind and Gear per Orrery, and then we're going to see what you can do about this.
Right.
Yeah, so right now your favorite format's Modern. What decks do you play in the current metas?
Well, on Magic Online, I sort of bounce around. I use this great card renting service, which lets me sort of pay a set amount per month, and I can sort of just exchange cards and play whatever I want.
Oh, that's cool.
But in paper, that's not really feasible because, a playset of a fetched land can be $200+. So I found a deck that I really like, and I just play that one, and that deck is Grixis Death Shadow, which, like Gino said, is widely considered to be one of, if not the best deck in the format.
And then in Standard, you're playing Teamer Energy?
Yeah. I sort of, I have about 54 cards that are always the same, and then change about 6 of the main deck and like a lot of the sideboard week to week, depending on, shifts I see in the data.
Yeah, and I think that leads to a great thing. When you were at Nationals, you actually had some deck tech, it seemed like. So how was Nationals? It was Standard and then Ixalan Limited, Ixalan Draft, if I remember correctly, right?
It was 6 rounds of Ixalan Draft and 6 rounds of Ixalan Standard. So Standard went very well. I either went 5-1 or 6-0. I can't really remember, but I was playing my classic Teamer Energy deck without the hint of black that a lot of people were playing that weekend. So I did have a couple of different things. I played more Confiscation Coups and Erroneous, and I thought that was going to be very good against people who were also playing Teamer Energy, which I expected to play that sort of mirror match a lot over the course of the weekend.
And what made you cut so for people who are not super familiar with the current Standard format, in Standard right now, Energy is the de facto best deck. It has been for half a year, it feels like, maybe
About.
more. Generally, it is red, blue, green. However, there's a really broken card called the Scarab God that is so good that decks have just basically splashed black just to play that one card. And right around Nationals was the time people were innovating. Hey, if I took the best deck and then put the best card in it and basically had to change very little about my deck, I might be able to win more.
Mm-hmm.
But what kept you out of the Black Splash?
Well, the weekend before that was actually the World Championship, where 24 of the best players come together and they play a very small tournament for very high stakes. And 3 of the most popular players on the planet right now are Owen Turtenwald, Reed Duke, and Huey Jensen. And for about a month, they practiced for this tournament, and they decided to play straight up Teamer, and they didn't want to play the Scarab God. And so I decided I'm not going to test for a month. I trust their judgment. And one of those 3 actually ended up winning the tournament. So instead of spending a lot of time innovating and changing it up, I sort of decided to play similar to their list and practice it a lot.
So I could remember as you were making your run at Nationals, I was rooting for you, and it seemed like you had a few pieces of prescient deck tech for that weekend. At the time, one of the decks that was rising in popularity was an Anointed Procession deck that was either Esper or White-Black. And you actually put some enchantment hate into your sideboard, some good enchantment hate, along with your stock deck, correct?
Right. So somebody who's been on the podcast before was Kyle a few months ago. And, we're sort of traveling buddies. We go to tournaments when we can. And he was actually playing the Anointed Procession deck. And he expected to sort of, get people with it and catch them off guard. But I think a lot of people were trying to do the same thing. So a few hours before the tournament, early in the morning, I decided to play a couple copies of a card called Slice and Twain, and also some Torrential Gearhulks to flash back those Slice and Twains, and that's a very good plan to beat Anointed Procession.
Yeah, and that also gives you some edge against any other wackadoo enchantment decks, whereas it seems like Teamer by default doesn't really have any answers for that.
Right. And also the Gearhulks, other people were doing that too, and it's good in the Teamer mirror to begin with, so it's not like you're putting too much into this tokens matchup.
Yeah, and Gearhulk's always good.
Yeah.
You can always flashback something valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also had a couple other nods to the deck. So that Ronus that I was playing for the mirror is also very good against the tokens deck. It kind of makes their 1/1s obsolete when you can just make your Rogue Refiners and Whirler Virtuosos trampling.
Oh God.
And I also played Aether Sphere Harvester, which is tough for that deck to beat without cast out, and it's very good at racing.
So the standard portion went very well for you. Is there any matches that really jump out to you? Any exchanges that you remember?
Sure. So one of the very first match of the day, my opponent was playing the Hidden Stockpile deck, and so in the first game, I mulliganed to 5 cards, and I kept one lander. I scryed a non-land card to the bottom. So already I'm like, oh no, not like this. Sort of, getting down on myself, like, is this really how the weekend's going to go? But then I think I made what was probably my best play of the weekend, which was he played his land and passed. I drew my card. It wasn't a land. So I knew right then and there I'm not winning this game. So instead of playing my land, I passed the turn so I wouldn't give him information about my deck. And then he played his other land and his Hidden Stockpile. I was like, okay, concede, this game is over. And then I was able to sideboard with full information, and he had no idea what my deck was.
Oh, wow. That's actually really smart. And
Yeah.
did he, when the match was over, did he say anything about this? It must have seemed pretty odd.
Well, Nationals is a lot of good players. I think he picked up on what I was doing. But there wasn't much he could do about it. I mean, I'm allowed to concede. So I ended up picking that matchup quite easily. I got a little lucky in the second and third games, which was, pretty nice. And it was sort of a pick-me-up. I felt really smart after doing it, and it put me in a good mood for the rest of the standard portion.
That's great. So what made you concede after turn 2 instead of letting him play out more of his strategy?
Well, I was going to have to go to discard, which would make the whole point of... I mean, I would discard a card and he'd be like, okay, Teamer Energy. And that would make my entire strategy of not playing the game useless. So, and once he played the blue-black land and the white-black land, so I knew that's the exact same deck that Kyle was playing. So I could basically probably name 70 out of his 75 cards just from those first 2 turns alone. So I decided there was no real point in playing the rest of the game.
Makes sense. Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought about discard. But I guess once you're making that play, it's pretty obvious as soon as the Hidden Stockpile hits the board.
Right.
Nothing else you really need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So standard went pretty well from there. How did limited go?
Well, basically, I think if I had practiced more Ixalan limited, I possibly could have even top-8'd or won the tournament. But that was basically my downfall over the weekend. Was my record in limited was 2-4 out of the 2 drafts. So the first draft I went 2-1, and the second draft I went 0-3, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no! It was I went 3-0 in the first draft, and then. Okay, can we rewind?
I think you went 2-1 and then 0-3, or 1-2 and 1-2.
That was it. That was it. Because I did win my first round of day 2.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It was definitely 1-2, 1-2. So what decks did you target? So for listeners who haven't played Ixalan very much, it's a tribal set. Meaning that there are basically 4 creature types that are really supported, and you're really incentivized to play those 4 creature types. They're dinosaurs, pirates, merfolk, and vampires. And at the time when Nationals happened, the consensus on what decks were the best were not necessarily out, and some of the decks that, like, there are the obvious decks, the tribal decks in the appropriate colors. For example, vampires are in white-black. White-black vampires is a good deck. if you could just take all of the cards in two colors, basically all the cards of one creature type in two colors, you'll probably end up with an okay deck. But some of the edges around those obvious decks were not really super explored at the time. So like green-black doesn't have overlapping creature types. So is there a deck there? Can you build a deck that plays green-black with any kind of regularity? Blue-white, same thing. There's no creature overlap. Is there a blue-white deck? Or are those two colors as a combination just really under-supported and weak? So at this point, the knowledge, the consensus around that and how to draft this format had not really solidified yet. So you were really drafting semi-blind, not completely blind, but a lot blinder than you would have been a week or two later.
Yeah, I hadn't drafted it very much. And so I wasn't very good at drafting it. I mean, I knew which cards were good, but I didn't know, like, for example, when my opponent passed me a card, I didn't know if that was a signal that was open or if that just sort of slipped through the cracks.
Mm-hmm. And so what decks did you end up drafting? So that's 2 drafts, right?
Yeah, I drafted a blue-black pirate deck, and I drafted a sort of my second draft was really a disaster. I had a blue-white-green deck where I had one very good card and a lot of very not good cards, and so I was really leaning on drawing that Carnage Tyrant.
It was really important for me to draw the good card and to avoid the bad cards as most as I could.
Well, the thing was, avoiding the bad cards wasn't possible because, I mean, there were so many of them. Also, I was drafting next to a Hall of Famer named Eric Froelich, and I played against him in one of my rounds, and he absolutely destroyed me. So,
I guess let's focus on that second draft. What was it that really screwed up your reading of the draft? Did you go in not knowing necessarily that blue-white was not a great color combination? Did something lure you into one of those colors and then you got cut on the second pack or something?
So I was trying to stay open and, keep my options afloat, sort of. And so I started off with some good blue cards, maybe thinking about going into blue-green Merfolk or blue-black Pirates again. And I also picked up some white cards, like the 2/2 with lifelink, and some like a 3/4 flyer or two, which are solid cards that I would put in almost any deck. And I had a bunch of blue cards and a bunch of white cards. I didn't want to play them together, but it actually didn't seem terrible by the end of pack 1, because I mean I had quality cards that didn't really need other cards to work well together.
Okay, makes sense. And then your mana didn't work out, and some of the stuff fell apart. So now that you've played more Ixalan draft, what's your read? What would you have done if you had another shot at it?
If I had another shot at it, I would have focused on maybe cutting off white very early, because white is good with basically any color except blue. I would still draft kind of similarly, except, really avoid blue-white, I guess.
Yeah, I think having played some Ixalan draft, it seems like as long as you just plant your flag and say, this is the tribe I'm going to play, within the first 3 or 4 picks, your deck will end up probably better than if you try and stay open, which is really weird compared to most other formats.
Right, and the thing is, honestly, if I were to do it again, I don't know if I would do much better, because, I mean, I've sort of avoided playing Ixalan draft as much as possible, because, I'm not very good at it, and I also don't find it to be very enjoyable.
Yeah, it's a real development problem, I think, on this set. You have never played a tribal focus set before this, right? This was your first one?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I drafted some Lorwyn and Morningtide when they were contemporaries, and That set had very similar problems to Ixalan Draft, but Ixalan amplifies the problem so much more because in Lorwyn there were 7 tribes, which
Right.
meant that there at most should only be one player who's drafting the same tribe as someone else, and that person would generally like the 2 people who were in the same tribe were really really screwed, but everyone else was basically on railroad tracks, just picking the cards that were the right creature type. And then once Morningtide came out, all of a sudden Morningtide added things like rogues and classes. So wizards, all these other types became supported, and so all of a sudden you could do some crossbreeding. Like shamans were in elementals and also tree folk. So you could dip your toes into different decks. Whereas with Ixalan, they made 4 tribes. Now, 2 of those tribes are split into 3 colors, so you could technically have 3 different pirate decks, 3 different dinosaur decks, 1 merfolk, 1 vampire deck. Maybe, and there's 8. But that's not actually how it plays out because some of these color combinations really depend on getting the good cards from a particular color. So generally you have just a not enough good cards to go around for everyone if you're going to try and stay open. And you can just get stuck because the cards rely so much on tribal synergies.
Right. There's almost always about 1 to 2 absolute train wreck drafts at every Ixalan table, which is kind of scary going into it. And there's not much you can do about it. Sometimes it's just the way the packs break, and that's not a great feeling.
Yeah. I found that just planting my flag immediately and just going, well, this is how it's going to go for me. At least I'm not going to miss out on the good cards early.
Right.
Will usually result in better outcomes for me, which sucks personally. As someone who primarily drafts, going into a draft knowing on pick like 3 or 4 that this is the only thing I'm going to be able to draft, and if I get cut, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
It's just really different.
So there are a couple other ways to approach it. Like one problem with that is, so let's say I'm sitting down and I open a Sanctum Seeker, and to my right, Gino opens a Mavrin Fane. So we're both going to want to be in vampires because those are both like excellent bomb rares. Except his draft is going to go much better than mine based on where he's seated, and that's something that just sticking to your first pick, it can really fall apart. So another thing that you can do, which is difficult, is sticking to colors like blue, green, and black, and using the treasure synergies to sort of play all the best cards you see.
Yeah, and that definitely works a lot better in sealed than it does in draft,
right?
Because you have a little bit of time to build treasures. Most of the treasure makers are 2 mana or more.
Yeah.
So you generally can't. If someone's coming for your life, you can't really rely on the treasures. And I find that Ixalan drafts tend to revolve around, I played a thing on turn 1 or 2, I put an enchantment on it or gave it a pirate's cutlass, and now deal with it.
Right. Those 3 to 4 color good stuff decks really struggle with streamlined merfolk, red white, or vampire decks.
Yeah, but there is a little bit more subtlety here, but I would say that Ixalan is one of the sets that, unfortunately, can't wait for Rivals. Let me put it to you that way.
Yeah.
So you also played a Modern tournament recently, Columbus, the Star City Open at Columbus.
Yeah, that was just a few days ago.
So how was that? How did you enjoy Modern? Modern is healthier than it's been in a long time. I remember it being such a degenerate format. It's nice to see it healthy.
Yeah, Modern has been going through lots of iterations and tweakings. New cards come out, cards get banned, cards get unbanned. But right now we're in a really stable spot, at least for the time being. I mean, they're thinking about experimenting with unbans, and they're printing new cards. So things aren't likely to stay this way forever. In fact, impossible to stay this way forever. But I mean, I guess it's good to enjoy it while you can.
Yeah. So you played Grixis Death Shadow. Any matches stand out to you there, or anything you learned from the tournament?
So I started. I mean, my deck is very good. And I ended up going 6-3, and I felt like in 2, maybe even 3 of the matches that I lost, there were things I could have done differently that could have led me to win. And I prefer the feeling of I messed up, but next time, if I think harder and work at it and practice, I have a chance to win, as opposed to when you play a deck like Affinity, you sort of, you cross your fingers, and when they play the Stony Silence or the Hercules Recall, you just shrug your shoulders and say, oh well, out of my control. Yeah, that doesn't feel great because, I mean, it's not up to you whether you win or not.
Mm-hmm. So you were actually debating between 2 different decks leading into the tournament. Grixis Death Shadow and I believe it was Jeskai Search for Azcanta?
Yeah, I was thinking about playing some sort of Jeskai deck, either a more aggressive one with Spellqueller, Geist of St. Tract, Vendilion Click, or a controlling deck with Search for Azcanta. But ultimately, I decided to go with Grixis Death Shadow because I have much more experience with the deck, and that's a really important thing when you're playing Modern. Funnily enough, the finals of the tournament was actually 2 Jeskai Search for Azcanta decks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so what was it that drew you to Search that would be or a Jeskai deck that would actually compel you to put down the deck that you spent so much time practicing?
So before a Modern tournament, I go to this website called MTG Goldfish and just look at the metagame and, recent 5-0s. I see, is there anything anybody isn't expecting that I can sort of, get them with? Or are there any decks that have just great matchups across the board for the tier 1 and even 2 decks? And I felt Jeskai was like that. I mean, it has burn spells and counter spells, so it can beat most anything. The only problem is really Dredge. That you can't beat Dredge, but if you play against Dredge, you can concede and go get lunch, I guess.
Yeah, if you can't beat every deck in Modern, there's so many linear, nasty strategies that just you can't have a sideboard bullet for all of them.
Yeah, but the thing is, Jeskai and Grixis Death Shadow are basically as close as you can get to those.
Yeah. Any deck that has access to discard, I feel like, at least has a puncher's chance against every deck.
Mm-hmm.
But very few decks. That's why Jund, regardless of the fact that it hasn't been the thing to do in Modern for a real long time, it's still around. It's always a threat.
Yeah. Well, there is talk about banning Bloodbraid Elf, which would make the Jund matchup a little better and just make every matchup a little better.
Yeah, I think Bloodbraid's probably safe at this point. I think you could probably unban it.
I agree.
Really good 2-for-1 at this point for 4 mana. I don't even know if it would be that played compared to some of the other 4 mana 2-for-1s that people are already playing.
Yeah. The cards that it contends with are Kalidas, Chandra, and Huntmaster of the Fells. Mm-hmm. And I think at this point, it's I think this Bloodbraid would be the one to play out of those 4. Kalidas is answered 1-for-1 very easily. Huntmaster doesn't do enough, and Chandra is bad from behind. But I think Bloodbraid Elf sort of is in the middle of all of those, where it's almost always good.
Yeah, it might be the better baseline play, but each of those other cards is better in circumstantially.
Right, and I think that Bloodbraid Elf is the best follow-up to Liliana of the Veil, and if we get to a point where Liliana is a very good card in the format, which it hasn't been in a few months, but, I mean, back in the day, maybe even just like a year ago, it was insane. The card was incredible.
Yeah, thankfully, I hope they keep driving the price down, because I am personally looking into making some kind of black-red Modern deck, because I have the lands.
Mm-hmm.
I have the lands for it, and I have Confidants. So I want to play something black-red, and Lily is the price-prohibitive thing that most of the decks I'm looking at play 4 ofs of, or 3 ofs of.
Yeah, that's a big part of Modern, is like, not everyone is a professional player. Not everyone has an infinite budget. there's restrictions based on like cards. So I mean, for this tournament, I wasn't gonna go drop $900 on a deck for a weekend, decide I didn't like it, and never play it again. That just didn't seem worth it to me.
Yeah, and for me, the only modern decks I can afford to play is something monocolored, something that is green-red, or something that is black-red, because I have the lands. I don't have any of the enemy fetches. I have all the allied fetches. I have playsets of at least shock lands for the Grixis colors. So I can make that stuff happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, you pay bills and for food and stuff. I don't.
That is true. Paying for food and bills and things and heat
Yeah.
changes your perspective on
Right.
whether you should get that fetch or not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with all the tournament stuff, why don't we turn a little bit to Rivals of Ixalan? Because, man,
Oh, goody. Yeah.
I can't wait for that. This set, I don't know if it's going to fix Limited, but I think it's going to at least inject a lot of lifeblood into Standard and Modern, weirdly enough. So,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So what cards do you see as big, like, no-brainer, this is a card that's going to see play in a format that's not limited, that is just slam dunk it?
Well, the big thing to me are the new additions for the tribal decks. Coming after just the one Ixalan block set came out, the decks really just weren't there. They're just objectively inferior to energy. But now, I mean, the slots that were missing are sort of being filled out. For example, the dinosaur deck has a new 2-mana ramp spell. It has, more powerful dinosaurs. The pirate decks have cheaper tempo cards. And also merfolk and vampires, they're all just getting better cards. And so they're getting to the point where they can possibly compete with energy.
Yeah, for me, the things that jumped out, the green-blue Merfolk Lord for 2
Right.
mana, that thing is going to see play, probably in Modern, potentially in Standard too.
Definitely.
It's,
I agree.
All it needs to say is Merfolk you control get +1/+1. That's all it needs to say.
That's huge.
Creature-type Merfolk.
Yeah, I think
Play
that's probably the best tribal deck right now, because it's going to have access to, like, Unsummon, Blossoming Defense, Negate, all these, powerful spells in addition to its Lord, the Mythic Rare that has all sorts of abilities. It attacks on a bunch of different angles, and I think that's the one that has the slightest chance of upsetting the energy decks.
Yeah, and it gets under them. The
Right.
nice thing about it is that energy, the problem with it is it just values you out so hard. It's got a lot of creatures that the energy deck doesn't care if they die. Whenever they play a new energy dork, they will just consume whatever energy was left over and then take over the board, even if you've one-for-one them up until that point. But Merfolk, almost all of its good cards are unblockable or threaten to make your unblockable things bigger or threaten to outgrow the energy stuff where they can trade safely. So I feel like you're definitely on the right track there. Like Deeproot Elite jumps out to me as well. It's a 2-mana Merfolk, one generic, one green. It's for a 1/1, but whenever another Merfolk enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target Merfolk you control. So,
Yeah, that one could be very good.
Yeah, from then on. And Jade Light Ranger, I don't even know if this needs to be in a Merfolk deck, but it's one generic and then green. When it enters the battlefield, it explores, then it explores again and it's a 2/1. So it can be a 4/3 that's basically scryed you twice, or it can be a 2/1 that drew you 2 cards, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I think could be either the best card in the deck, or maybe not even see play in it at all, depending on how aggressive they have to be. But if they're playing more of a mid-range game plan, that seems like it's going to be at least a 3 or a 4 of.
Yeah, that thing is Rogue Refiner for Merfolk. Almost literally.
So one thing I want to talk about really quick is what would happen if none of these decks can compete, which is a sad prospect, but honestly not unlikely. I mean, there's hoping that things go well, but let's say the Pro Tour about a month after the set release comes out and energy is still on top, we see like 6 or 7 energy decks, maybe even just 4 in the top 8. I think it's going to put Wizards in a place where they're forced to make another ban, which honestly I don't think many people would be against.
Yeah, I think that they would probably ban Attune with Aether, and then life would go on.
I don't know if Attune with Aether is the one. I think Whirler Virtuoso is honestly the problem.
Yeah, but I think that Attune is what allows everything else to happen, because it makes your
That's
mana
true.
good. It gets you energy on turn 1, which it's one of the only like actually good things that make energy on turn 1, and it allows the Whirler to pump out a bunch of dudes. If the Whirler only made 1 or maybe 2 dudes over its lifespan, it wouldn't be so devastating.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what's ultimately correct, but all we can count on for sure is that Wizards is going to ban the wrong one.
Yes, whichever one was correct. They will throw a dart, or they'll ban both.
Hopefully.
So another deck that jumps out to me as now being playable with the release of Rivals is Vampires.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, it is a 2-color deck that just got all the good cards in the 2 colors. And, again, the 2-mana Lord jumps out. Hey, it says 2 mana, 1 white, 1 black. For a 2/2, other vampires you control get +1/+1.
Yeah,
Now,
I think that's a good one. I think that it has 2 very good 1-drops in the 2/1 that possibly flies and Legion's Landing. Both like excellent cards in my opinion, and it has some good top end. It has the hostage taker ish card, but one problem I do see is fumigate decks and settle the wreckage decks. But there are a couple ways you can get around that. There's duress, and there's a new card that was also printed in Rivals of Ixalan, which I don't know what it's called, but it's 1 and a white. And it says that they cannot cast spells on their next turn.
Sphinx's Decree?
That could be it, yeah.
Each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that player's next turn.
Right, and then there's also, like, you could maybe splash blue for negate or something, I don't know.
Yeah,
If that's, like, a big enough concern.
I wouldn't personally, as someone who, I've been playing red-white aggro, basically, for the last few months, and in my experience with that, a lot of the best vampire... I just basically take the good vampire stuff, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just Legion's Landing and Adanto Vanguard. Those are the good ones right now. But I think those 2 cards are really, really good, even if you're wiping the board, because one of them doesn't get wiped, and the other one just keeps making tokens and does not care. Like, once you flip Legion's Landing, you can just keep churning out nonsense.
Yeah, the deck also has options to sort of go really wide with Aketra's Monument and Shefet Dunes, and that can be a way to get around energy decks that try to 1-for-1 you.
Yeah, a really subtle card that I think will be very good is Dusk Legion Zealot. It's 1 generic, 1 black for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, you lose 1 life. It's a vampire soldier. It is a black Elvish Visionary.
Okay, that's not bad.
In vampires. So that is something that I think we'll see play. I think Oathsworn Vampire is something that can help if board wipes are a problem. This is 1 generic, 1 black for a 2/2. It enters the battlefield tapped, but you can cast it from your graveyard if you gain life this turn. So it can just keep coming back, and they can wipe the board as many times as they want.
Yeah, there's a lot of resiliency there. I mean, it kind of laughs at Harnessed Lightning and a Braid.
Yes, it very much laughs at those 2 cards. Outside of those 2 tribes, I think that Dinosaurs will probably have enough to get there, but I don't know if it'll be good.
So Dinosaurs is interesting. I think that it will have an excellent Teamer Energy matchup, because it can sort of, a good way to approach Magic is always to go slightly bigger than your opponent. And I think Dinosaurs sort of does that. The cards they sort of match up well against the energy cards. But it seems like it's going to have a huge problem against Ramanop Red, the aggressive deck. and
Yeah,
that just doesn't seem like much of a game.
yeah. Their sideboard will have to be very dedicated to not getting run over in the early game. But man, do they go wide. They have so many cost reducers now.
Yeah.
They go so big and they can, like, because it's cost reduction and not mana creation for a lot of their best ramp cards, they can just keep throwing down gigantic dinos once they get going in a way that most ramp decks can't.
Yeah. There's a lot we can say about the format. All I know is that I literally never correctly predict it. I usually get bits and pieces, but there's a lot of things at play and a lot of subtle things and card interactions that sort of shape the format. Like about a year ago, Kalidas was a very big card in mid-range decks, but Reflector Mage made that card unplayable.
Yep. And then they had to ban it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of small things like that that are hard to predict, but can be very, very important.
Yeah, and Pirates, same thing. It's got a lot of stuff going on, but we'll have to figure out which of these Pirate cards are actually what you want to be doing, if you want to be playing Pirates at all. So, what of the cards in Rivals, which card jumps out to you as, like, maybe it's a card people are sleeping on that they're not talking about, but you need to know about?
Well, there's a lot of, like, really interesting cards that are either, like, great or not very good at all. So, the first thing that jumps to mind is, I think it's called Azor's Gateway. It's a 2-mana artifact that you can pay 1 and sort of loot. And if you meet a certain requirement, you get this incredible land that makes a ton of mana, and it's really great.
Yeah, so it's 1 mana tap. It's 2 generic to play, and then 1 generic tap. Draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different costs different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life, untap it, and transform it. And then the other side is Sanctum of the Sun. It's a legendary land that adds X mana of any one color to your mana pool, where X is your life total. So you will always get at least 6 mana from this.
Yeah, so I think that card could be good, but again, there's things like Abrade, there's fast creature decks, but in a slow mid-range format, I think that card could be excellent.
Yeah, I compare it with Treasure Map.
That's a very good card, too.
Except I think that looting is probably stronger than scrying, and this is just letting you loot every turn, pretty much.
Yeah.
Though you have to loot way more, and there's specifics on what it takes to flip it in a way that Treasure Map, you just activate it 3 times and then Value Town.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just going to be all the creatures for the new tribes. A lot of them are just clearly designed for constructed, and so the big question is, are they good enough?
Yeah, for me, I think Blood Sun is a card that I think is going to be very good. I don't think anyone's sleeping on it, though. But Blood Sun, coming soon for fetch lands near you.
Right. There's a chance it sees modern play. There's some interesting things you can do with it, like shut down fetch lands. And there's also this card, which I have in my commander deck, and it just spiked to about $40. So it's a land that when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice 2 other lands, and it creates 3 mana of any color. So it's like a Black Lotus, but you have to sack 2 lands.
Lotus Veil.
Right, Lotus Veil. And with Blood Sun, you play that card, and you don't have to sacrifice, so it's just like a Black Lotus that sticks around.
Yeah. But you just need to get Blood Sun into play first, and then it's just value. All kinds of value. Let me see. Any cards that jump out to me that are actually being slept on? Because I feel like a lot of the ones that jump out to me are obviously good. Like Rekindling Phoenix. That card's amazing. I think that once Hazoret rotates, that thing's just Hazoret.
Right.
It's very similar. Let's see. Jadelight Ranger. World Shaper's kind of cool.
Oh, one I really like is it's 1 red for a 2/2 pirate. I think it's called Daring Buccaneer.
Yep.
And that's almost always just going to be 1 red for a 2/2 pirate, and that's a very good rate.
Yep. I really like Protean Raider, which is 1 blue-red. If you attack, it's a 2/2, so it's a Gray Ogre. But then if you attacked with a creature this turn, you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. I think that's the cheapest rate we've gotten on a clone that doesn't have a drawback.
Yeah, that seems like a really powerful card. So, I mean, that card could be great, but there's 3 different ways to go with pirates. There's red-black, or even 4 ways: red-black, blue-red, blue-black, and Grixis, which is all 3. So, I mean, there's clearly good pirates cards, but the question is which are the best, and whichever are the best, they're just going to play those 2 colors, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know that card even needs to be played in Pirates. I think you just play it in a deck that wants a cheap clone. Like, you could play it in a red-blue, just a red-blue deck that wanted clones.
Well, I mean, a red-blue deck is probably going to be a pirate deck.
Oh, I think it could be modern.
Oh, modern?
I'm talking even more, because it's at 3 mana, it's the cheapest clone effect outside of, what is the illusion? The 2-mana illusion clone.
It's...
Oh, what is the name of that thing?
Phantasmal Image?
Yeah, Phantasmal Image. It's the cheapest one since Phantasmal Image. It's almost that cheap, and it sticks around. So
there's also Phyrexian Metamorph.
Metamorph is 3 mana, right? But one's Phyrexian?
It's basically 3 mana and 2 life, and it can also copy artifacts.
Okay, then never mind. Never mind that, because that's better than Protean Raider. My bad. Yeah. I forgot that card exists. Other cards that jump out. I love Path of Metal, the red-white duel, the red-white enchantment that flips.
Oh, that card's weird. I don't know. It could be good, but it seems weird.
So when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste, which is really specific. And then whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste, transform it. And then on the other side of Path of Metal is Metzali, Tower of Triumph. And it has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Generic 1 red, tap it. Tower of Triumph deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then 2 and a white, tap, choose a creature at random that attack this turn, destroy that creature. So I think it might have the one of the most powerful flip sides of any of the cycle of flip cards in this set. And each of those abilities is something you really want if you are racing an opponent and playing a very aggressive deck. Because Path of Metal clears out everything that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste. Say, for example, if you were playing a white-red aggressive deck in Standard right now, all of your creatures have Haste, or Double Strike or First Strike, like all of them. So it won't even damage your creatures, but it will clear out servo tokens, it will clear out vampire tokens. So it's basically a one-sided wrath against some sorts of decks. And then if you just attack with your creatures that already have haste, and you only need to attack with 2 of them, then you get a clock, a 10-turn clock by itself, that also ramps you mana, that also, when your opponent starts cracking back, it does not target. It's important to mention that the kill effect is choose a creature at random. So it can get around hexproof, it can get around hexproof. It's not a sacrifice, it's a destroy. So it won't kill indestructibles. But it can kill Hydra, for example. Bristling Hydra.
Yeah, this seems like the card that is sort of, written off until it's sort of the secret tech for 2 or 3 weeks in the middle of Standard.
Yeah, and if a vampire token deck or, some sort of servo-based strategy comes up again, I would put this in my sideboard. Now, I don't think I would replace it in my specific deck with... I think Legion's Landing just does this role, but better because it's cheaper.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I think as a sideboard card against token decks, that also gives you a big advantage when you flip it. I think the flip side is as good or better than a Danto First Fort. Like
agreed. Yeah.
It's unblockable damage and it's removal. Hadana's Climb is another one that jumps out to me. That's the blue-green one. At the beginning of combat on your turn, it's a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if that creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, transform it. And then on the other side is Winged Temple of Araska that has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and then 1 generic, then a green and a blue. Tap, target creature you control gets flying and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power, which is really gross. If you're playing Merfolk, you can probably get a thing with a +1/+1 counter on it before you even play this card. If you're playing Winding Constrictor, it's even grosser. And by the time you've
definitely there's the Explore cards, and then there's the green 1-drop that puts a +1/+1 counter. There's all sorts of stuff that puts counters.
Yeah, and once you flip it, you only need to +X/+X and flying something so many times before your opponent's just dead.
Right.
Yeah, so those are definitely the two that jump out to me. I want Arc of Araska to be good. It's an Ascend land. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing, and then it taps for a colorless, but then you can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card. Only do this if you have the City's Blessing. I want to live in a world where that's good.
That seems like a card that would have been great when Standard was nothing but Abzan and midrange mirrors.
Yes.
But no longer. We have Hazoret now.
I know, but Azor is here, and he brings the Sphinx's revelations.
Yeah.
He's going to reveal things, and then you'll have enough life to live to... I know he draws you cards, but what if you drew more cards, but, less efficiently?
I don't know. Maybe.
At the low price of lands that don't make color?
Yeah.
Yeah, that card's not going to be good enough. But I want to live in the world where I can put this extra kind of awkward land into my deck and get a little bit of edge. And Tillinolly's Summoner is another card that jumps out to me. I don't know what to make of it, but it looks powerful. It's 1 generic, 1 red for a 1/1 with Ascend. And Ascend is if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing. And whenever Tillinolly's Summoner attacks, you can pay X and red. If you do, create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. At the beginning of your next end step, exile those tokens unless you have the City's Blessing. So the problem with Tillinolly's Summoner is, man, that thing's not going to live past that first attack.
Right. I think it's a cool limited card. That's one thing that you can say about all these wacky cards that we've talked about the past few minutes, is that if they don't make it constructed in any form whatsoever, they're going to make for really fun limited play.
Yeah, but man, paying X and just fireballing your opponent with 1/1s, it's just so hard to block. I wish it was in a position where it's good enough, but you're going to have to, it's just going to get shocked is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think this limited format is going to have lots of back and forth and lots of, because all these cards that we've seen are just they're powerful and a lot of them are interactive. It's cool. I like it.
What do you think about the card I'm calling Snatchcaster Mage? It's what is the actual name of this card? Direfleet Daredevil. It's 2 mana, 1 generic, 1 red for a first strike, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from the opponent's graveyard. You may cast that card this turn, and you may spend mana or mana of any type to cast that spell. If it would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So it is a red. It is Snapcaster Mage, but on your opponent, and it doesn't have flash.
In a red-black or red-blue Pirates deck in Standard, they do want a critical mass of cheap creatures, and it would be interesting if you sort of attack a Temur Energy deck or a Ramen Up Red deck, and then can you remind me, is it on attack or on combat damage?
On ETB. It's just like
right.
Snatchcaster Mage.
So
it's stealing.
That's kind of cool for casting your opponent's... Wait, does it do mana of any color?
Yep.
Okay, so it can hit Fatal Pushes and Abrades, Harness Lightnings, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and you can spend it as though it were mana of any type, so even if you took a Warping Whale or something, you could cast it, because it doesn't care.
Yeah.
I don't know if this card will see play in any format outside of Standard, or if it will even see play in Standard, but I want to live in a world where... Actually, maybe you could board it in against someone.
Maybe.
In Modern. If you're up against some control deck, board it in and go into their graveyard for their card advantage spells.
Modern, I think, is pushing it. I mean, the cards are just so hyper efficient that I don't think this card even has a slight chance.
I love Dream.
Okay, I'll let you dream.
But what if you... Okay, follow me. You're playing the red-blue deck or something, and you're up against a black deck, and then you play this on turn 2, and you take their Thoughtseize and Thoughtseize them. Eh?
I don't know. I usually just put Thoughtseize in my deck, so...
Okay, what if you were playing black-red, and you put Thoughtseize in your deck, but they put Thoughtseize in their deck?
Cast my own Thoughtseize?
But then you're out of them because you cast them all.
Or actually, what I do is I cast Young Pyromancer, and then I cast Thoughtseize. And that seems even better.
And that's the deck I'm trying to build.
Right.
Yeah, I want to live in a world where this card is good, but if instead of First Strike it had Flash, it would be so much more playable.
I agree. That sounds like something I could get on board with.
But unfortunately, it has First Strike instead. So I think that's enough Rivals of Ixalan. I hope that it will fix Limited, but I don't think it will, because it seems like it has the same problems that Ixalan Limited had.
Yeah, I'm not really great at deconstructing Limited formats just based on what the cards do and looking at like a Mythic spoiler page. I really need to like play it and get the reps in to really understand it on a deep level.
Yeah, I think so my now like 13 years of Limited experience says to me this set has added more cards that are powerful, and they at least added uncommons in the color pairs that were unplayable before. So white-blue has Resplendent Griffin, which is an uncommon, which is powerful, and green-black has Jungle Creeper. Mm-hmm. So they're at least filling in the gaps. And the individual cards in this set are more powerful than in Ixalan. So because there are 2 packs of Rivals to 1 pack of Ixalan, I think we're going to be able to play color combinations that we couldn't have played before. But I think that the most powerful decks are still going to be the tribal ones.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that out of the way, let's get to my favorite part of every interview. Let's get to the rapid fire.
Ooh, I'm nervous.
Are you prepared?
No, isn't that the point?
Exactly. Welcome to Rapid Fire. I'm going to ask you questions. You will have some time to answer, but not a lot.
Okay.
All right. First up, what's your favorite Magic color?
Blue.
What's your favorite card?
Snapcaster.
Who's your favorite player?
Reed Duke.
What's your favorite strategy to play?
Thoughtseizes and discard spells and creatures.
Clear the ground and then murder them.
Yeah.
What is your favorite city to visit for tournaments?
Ooh, Montreal was super nice, and the people were really nice. I know that's a stereotype, but, like, it's true.
What was your favorite food to eat in Montreal?
Ooh, I mean, like a weirdo, I ate American food there, like cheeseburgers.
What?
Yeah.
Come on, man. Do better. What is your favorite tournament snack when you're stuck at a tournament ground?
Ooh, almonds. Almonds. Definitely get salted almonds. That's what I do because tournament convention center food is so expensive. I mean, last weekend in Columbus, I bought an orange juice for $4, and it wasn't even that good. Definitely, if you're going to tournaments, bring water bottles and bring snacks.
Wait, orange? What kind of orange juice are we talking here? Was it fresh squeeze?
It was like Ocean Spray.
What?
It was $4, and I got to the front of the line, and I was like, am I not going to... I waited 5 minutes for this. Am I just not going to buy the orange juice?
I'm going to miss my tournament. I'm going to miss my round if I don't buy this orange juice right here.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty highway robbery. While you were in Columbus, did you get any Jenny's ice cream or Grater's ice cream?
I did not, but I have family in Columbus, which is really convenient because I don't have to stay at some crappy hotel. So they sort of took me around to their favorite spots, and I go to that place a lot.
Yes, you should. Next time you go, you should have those ice creams. They're very good.
Great.
My favorite story is that the person who opened Jenny's Ice Cream used to work as a flavorologist at Grater's Ice Cream, but she kept making too many crazy flavors. So she said, you know what, if you're going to keep squashing my individuality, I'm going to go make my own ice cream store.
What kind of degree do you need to become a flavorologist? That seems way better than any other job.
I don't look. One, I don't know if that was her actual title. Two, a BA, Bachelor's of Arts. What is the best game you've ever played?
Ooh, Magic the Gathering.
What is the best game of Magic the Gathering you've ever played?
That's really tough. I had one. I was playing a Jeskai mirror against some Magic Online grinder at just like a side tournament on day 2 of a Grand Prix, and it came to decking, and it was great.
What is your favorite non-Magic the Gathering game? This can be a board game or a video game, your call. Or Duck Goose, your call.
I like Civilization games. Those are cool. Got into those pretty recently.
Nice. What is the best non-playing moment you've had around Magic? So, hanging out at a tournament, talking to someone, anything like that.
So this meant a lot to me. I was with Kyle, and I was talking to Gerard Fabiano at Nationals, and then Owen Turtenwald and Huey Jensen just came over and started talking to us, and I mean, I had to like try really hard to keep my cool.
So is that 3 Hall of Famers or 2?
That's 2.
Is Gerard a Hall of Famer?
He's not.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
If you could change one thing about Magic, what would it be?
More interactive and less cards like Hazoret that are hard to kill.
What is the worst deck you've ever played?
Ooh, worst deck I've ever played. Are we talking constructed?
Yes, worst deck that you elected to play on purpose.
Right, my first Grand Prix, green-red goggles ramp. That deck is terrible.
Yeah, it turns out when pros play that deck, it looks real good, but in reality...
But also, this was several years ago, and I was terrible too.
Yes, that is true. And I think with that, that'll be the interview.
Great.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
And is there any shout-outs, anything you want to say before we peace out?
Shout out to my parents for buying me plane tickets to random places so I can play a silly card game.
Outstanding. And so thank you, listeners. We will have more Magic coverage probably the next time a set comes out. And if people like this, let me know, because our numbers say maybe you don't, but I don't care. So please, positive information. And if you want to reach out to the show, remember at Deep Listens Pod or at That Pinguino on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. You can hit up our comment sections or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, Alex. And till next time, peace!